Hi, and thank you very much for inviting me at the ICAI 2020. A special thanks to the Chong'an University and the Humanities Research Institute, and especially Professor Jiwon Shim, who's been so keen on hearing me speak here. I thank you very much for all the interest that you guys are showing in the research of AI and its implications on society. I think it's a very important topic to reflect upon. My name is James Haillot O'Connor, and I'm a PhD candidate in fourth year law in Aix-en-Provence University in France. I'm also registered in Paris Sorbonne Science University. So I have a background in law, and my research focuses on the implications of artificial intelligence and especially the use of AI for law enforcement that it has on democracy. So that's one of the main issues I've been focusing on in these past few years, actually. So I've also been working in a research institute here in Paris, the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies, that also focuses on the studies of such matters. So today, I'm going to be talking about the use of artificial intelligence for crime prevention and trying to determine whether or not they cause a special risk to democracy. And as you'll see, we can start safely to say that it is going to be posing a certain risk, especially from examples that will derive from the American and French model. So here you will see the presentation, and I will be speaking in the background for the most part. So my research tries to determine, as I said, the various uses of AI-based systems for crime prevention. So I've managed to pin down a few that I will present today. Most of the examples I have chosen to present are from the American and European context and illustrates the variety of uses of AI for crime prevention. So first of all, I think it's important to talk about what we analyze as AI, and especially AI-based systems. So the Council of Europe has contributed a lot to demystify AI and writes the following about the technology. So while the term, artificial intelligence, so AI, has entered the common language and become trivial in the media, there is no really shared definition. In the broadest sense, the term refers indistinctly to systems that are pure science fiction, so-called strong AIs, a self-aware form, and systems that are already operational and capable of performing very complex tasks, so face or voice recognition, vehicle driving. So these systems are described as weak or moderate AIs. This confusion contributes to purely speculative fears, autonomous, conscious AI opposed to human, that would remain anecdotal if they did not disturb the measurement of real issues, such as the impact on fundamental rights, of decision-making processes based on math models, and therefore difficult the development of regulatory frameworks. So that's what the Council of Europe has been saying. So what the Council of Europe is saying is that AI makes the general public scared of a risk of a world taken over by robots. But of course, that's not the case. AI should be referred to as a computer software allowing the automation of certain tasks thanks to large data sets, allowing in some cases to make large-scale correlations or to train software to recognize shapes and sounds. So in this presentation, we will focus on AI applications for crime prevention and to determine if they cause a risk for democracy. So we focus on predictive policing and facial recognition. So these are the more the warmest issue. So first of all, we have to talk about what is predictive policing. So Tim Law from the Brennan Center for Justice, a US-based NGO, defines predictive policing as computer systems that analyze large sets of data, including historical crime data, to help decide where to deploy police or to identify individuals who are purportedly more likely to commit or be a victim of a crime. So that's his definition. So according to him, proponents argue that predictive policing can help predict crimes more accurately and effectively than traditional police methods. However, critics have raised concerns about transparency and accountability. Additionally, while big data companies claim that their technologies can help remove bias from police decision making, algorithms relying on historical data risk reproducing those very biases. So that's a very important issue here because in the late 2000s, predictive policing was developed in the hope to reduce racial bias in policing in the United States. At the time, it was thought that this technology could be more objective than US police officers. So now let's talk about the case of Los Angeles and Predpol. So Predpol started as a research project led by a professor at UCLA, Jeff Brantingham, who is an anthropologist and specializes in mapping patterns of human behaviors using mathematical models. He is the founder of a multi-million venture, Predpol, the leader of place-based predictive policing. That's what Predpol is. So Predpol was developed using an algorithm that was developed to measure seismic aftershocks from earthquakes. So according to his theory, crime followed the same patterns and could be visualized as having ripple-like effects. And when identified, the pattern could be used as a model to determine when and especially where crime might occur. In order to create these models, one would need data. So in the case of Predpol, a partnership was concluded with the LAPD, so the Los Angeles Police District, this department. So Predpol would then use the LAPD's data sets to create the model. So once the model was created, the Predpol app would work like an Uber app, sending police patrols in places where crime was most likely to occur. So even though the idea was seducing, many problems arose. Firstly, the LAPD did not inform communities that they were developing this tool for policing. Then, minorities felt targeted by these tools and created the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition led by Mr. Hamid Khan. This group filed many legal complaints to have access to more information in 2016. They felt like the tools targeted them and their neighborhoods, especially. So after many months of administrative proceedings, they managed to have predpol algorithms audited, and they realized that police officers were not following the instructions they were given as to how they should use the software. So AI Now is a New York-based research institution that was created in 2016. So it has voiced strong criticism against the software and has contributed to reinforce the negative public opinion on the subject. I would really advise you to look at their research because it's very interesting in all these topics. So what I can say about the topic is that firstly, it doesn't seem very scientific to believe that such practices are more effective than good police training. Indeed, reinforcing police presence in some neighborhoods is important to reduce crime, but I don't think that police officers need a software to know which neighborhood needs more patrolling. Their training and experience should help them there. Also, building a predictive model with police data cannot reduce bias, but actually will embed that structural bias in the software. So here, let me explain. To be able to predict, you have to train the model with data of past events. Hence, if what you are trying to predict is assault, you will create a model with all the places and times where assaults happened in the past. So if you have many assaults in certain neighborhoods at a certain time in the day, the model will tell you to send a police car at that time and in that place. The problem with that is that information is drawn from police records. So the results of observations made by police officers during their patrols over many years. What critics say is that it's a self-realizing prophecy. The more police you have in a neighborhood, the more crime data you have, and then on. Another problem is the race issue, especially in the United States. Police are sent to patrol Black and Latino neighborhoods, hence reinforcing the bias in the predictive software. Also, what happens in places where there is not a lot of crime? Should we never send police patrols? Because if you don't have crimes, you don't have data, so the algorithm just does whatever. I mean, just don't enforce and don't advise police cars to go to these neighborhoods. So that's a bit problematic. Now let's talk about facial recognition. So how is facial recognition used in crime prevention in Europe and in the States? So first of all, let's try to understand what facial recognition is and how it works before we can describe how it is used for crime prevention. So facial recognition technology is a software-based AI that is trained to recognize faces on images. Facial recognition can work on static images and on moving images, such as films. In order to be able to recognize faces, the software is fed many images and trained either by hand or automatically to recognize them. Once a face is identified in a picture, then it can be exploited in different ways and used for crime prevention. One of the many ways it can be used is to try and identify people in public places. So this type of facial recognition software can only work in places where there are large databases that comprise high-quality pictures and thus are able to link certain traits to specific individuals. Systems used in China can fit that particular category. For example, a few years back, there was the case of a felon arrested in a stadium and recognized among thousands and thousands of people. For such systems to work, countries need to have a strong network of high-quality video surveillance as well as social acceptance of such technology. In France, after terrorist attacks in Paris in 2016, 2017, and in Nice in 2017, the Nice mayor, Christian Estrosi, decided to experiment with such tools during a large event in February 2019. It was not a success. The technology wasn't ready, and the social acceptance of the phenomenon wasn't there. So in that experience that you could see here, it took place outdoors, and people had a choice to use a line with facial recognition cameras and one without in order to access a venue for a public event. Here it was a carnival. Less than 10% of the public used the facial recognition line. Also, the French watchdog for personal data protection, the CNIL, has condemned that experiment because the local authorities did not publish any technical results concerning the number of false positives and biases. So, the use of facial recognition by the South Wales police brought before a UK court is a very interesting operation to study. So here, facial recognition software was deployed by the South Wales Police in the United Kingdom in 2017, and an experiment was led between May 2017 and March 2018 during important sporting events where large crowds gathered. Two apps were tested, AFR Locate and AFR Identity. So, AFR Locate was developed by the Japanese tech firm NEC. AFR's goal was to identify if a person of interest was present in the venue, near it, or in the touristic spots in Cardiff. Police cars equipped with cameras would film the crowds and simultaneously interrogate a database containing the biometric information related to the people of interest. This database constituted a watch list. If one of the cameras detected the face of a person on a watch list, it would trigger an alarm signal that was monitored by police officers. After notifications, a police officer was sent to the place where the individual was stationed. AFR Locate was the first experiment during the Football Championship and the Six Nations tournament for rugby. At first, many false positives were triggered. After a few adjustments, the results were more precise. So researchers from the University of Cardiff noted that the low quality of pictures would trigger many false positives once the surveillance cameras were replaced with higher definition ones. Another problem arose. The database took too long to respond because of the high volume of data to analyze. The software led to the arrest of 4 people during 7 separate events. According to reports written by researchers at the University of Cardiff, the high number of false positives reduced the police officers' trust in the system. Also, this experiment and later the deployment of the AFR tool on a large scale in Wales and other parts of the UK triggered a legal action led by civil liberties campaigner Ed Bridges. The Bridges versus South Wales police case is a very interesting case to discuss. Mr. Bridges was among the people whose face was filmed by the AFR Locate program during the experiments led in Cardiff. So he considered that his privacy rights were infringed by the use of the software and sued the South Wales police for it. At first, his demand was rejected by the High Court. However, the Court of Appeal ruled in his favor on 3 counts. The court held that Bridges' right to privacy under the Article 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights was breached because, as the court wrote, there was too broad discretion left to police officers in applying the technology. South Wales Police also breached their public sector equalities duty, the judges concluded. So by failing to properly investigate whether the facial recognition algorithms were biased in terms of race or sex. So in a key passage, the court ruled that we would hope that as AFR is a novel and controversial technology, all police forces that intend to use it in the future would wish to satisfy themselves that everything reasonable which could be done had been done in order to make sure that the software used doesn't have a racial or gender bias. So the concern of racial bias is a very important one when it comes to facial recognition technology. Indeed, in 2018, a researcher at MIT lab concluded that software supplied by 3 companies made mistakes in 21% to 35% of cases for darker-skinned women. On the other hand, the same study concluded that the error rate for white males was less than 1%. This particular study revealed that the use of facial recognition in order to identify culprits led to their arrest can be excessively wrong for darker-skinned people and thus raise many ethical concerns as to their use by police forces for crime prevention. So, as we pin down all of these problems, we can now talk about the way that facial recognition is regulated and should be regulated in the States and in Europe. So, one of the problems is that facial recognition is not regulated in the European Union. In France, the CNIL, which is the watchdog for data protection, calls for a national debate on the topic. Indeed, the implementation of facial recognition in public places would trigger a social change that needs to be discussed by the public. Personally, before giving the conclusion of my research, I just want to also point out the fact that in the United States, the situation is not so different than it is in Europe, because as you can see here on this slide, there is a proposal bill that is in the US Congress that would ban police use of facial recognition. So for the moment, we don't know what is happening with it. But normally it should maybe pass. We'll see after the elections. But in local, you have other local examples of regulations, such as the San Francisco City, the Oakland County, and I think cities in the US have banned facial recognition technology for law enforcement. Also, Microsoft, Amazon, and IBM say that they will not provide police forces with facial recognition technology. They are afraid for their image, I think, but also it's important for their brands not to be associated with difficult situations that are caused by the use of facial recognition by police forces. Also, here, this last article, which is in French, says that the European Regulation Authority for Data Protection asks for a moratorium on facial recognition. So there is a strong willingness in Europe and in the US to regulate facial recognition because of the danger that it causes. So as for my conclusions on the ethical and philosophical challenges of the use of AI for crime prevention, I can see various issues that oppose the deployment of such technology. A part of my research goes to say that democracy cannot survive the deployment of facial recognition in public places because of the sense of anonymity that one feels allows people to live their lives without a concern of permanent conformity to social norms. Facial recognition creates a sense of permanent concern over one's behavior, what one can do or not do. This, to me, kills creativity, freedom of expression, and of demonstration. Facial recognition in public places would ensure total control over one of the last parts of society where one can feel free to be whoever they want and defend their values and points of view. To illustrate this, I would like to take the following example. So in the US, facial recognition tools were used to identify demonstrators during the Black Lives Matter demonstrations, leading to the wrongful arrest of many. Knowing that dark-skinned people trigger over 20% of false positives, how can one feel free enough to demonstrate in the streets and defend their rights when they know they can be arrested by police with no justification other than the result of a biased algorithm? This fear that people feel has a name. It's called the chilling effect, when you're too afraid to defend your rights as citizens. And this is the main issue here that we have in this situation. It's the fear, because no technology is problematic in itself. And that's one thing I really wanted to stress as a conclusion, is that no technology is problematic. It's only the way that we use it that becomes problematic, but not the only way that we use it now. But in the future, if the technology goes into the wrong hands or with people who have the wrong ideas about democracy, they can be very, very dangerous. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you have a great rest of the convention. Bye. Thank you very much.